2 years ago, I made this snake game in Golang as a learning experience, but after some reflection, I wanted to do better. So now 2 years later, I want to recreate this snake game with some upgrades and do something new. Here's my idea, and I have 3 goals I want to accomplish. The first thing is I want this new snake game to be developed without a game engine. In the Golang implementation, I use the game engine called Rebooting, and recently I've been interested in learning about graphics programming. So I thought I could do something new where I can learn graphics programming and create a game with just the library for rendering. It might be tough because now I removed a layer of abstraction, and there are a lot of things the game engine provides that I won't have access to, but I think it'll be fine. Part of the fun is to do something different and potentially challenging. The second goal I want for this game is to have better graphics than the Golang implementation. What I want specifically is to have a 3D snake game with textures, because in the Golang implementation it is done in 2D and it only has solid colors. The third goal is to develop this game in a code editor in NeoVim. I'm a prolific VS Code user, but I think it's time I diversify my use of code editors. I recently had an incident at work where the VS Code service didn't work and I couldn't SSH into a Linux box using VS Code, which definitely made me rethink my relationship with code editors. I talked about using a Vim-like editor in a previous video, so I will try to write this in NeoVim. So, with these 3 goals set, let's recreate this snake game. Before any coding at all, I need to do some research of the tools I will use. I have to select a tool that can satisfy these goals. Since I will not use a game engine and I want to get more into graphics programming, my choices are using a rendering library like Metal, OpenGL, or Vulkan. I believe most of these rendering libraries support 3D and texturing, which would automatically satisfy goal number 2. In the end, I chose OpenGL mainly because there's a lot of resources online to learn, and the other graphics library I was looking at, like Vulkan, seemed to have a higher learning curve. Now to select the library, I have to learn how to use it. I use this free resource called Learn OpenGL by Joey DeVry. As I briefly looked through it, I realized it's a full-blown textbook with over 60 chapters and problems for you to do. I had a good feeling about this textbook because I have a bias with them. Sometimes I feel like they give a much more comprehensive overview on the topic at hand. Now, I'm not going to go through all 60 chapters because that would be absurd, but I did go through the first 11 chapters of the book and felt like it was enough for the snake game. It took a couple weeks of reading and doing the practice problems, but I was able to learn the fundamentals. Here's a demo as a result of chapter 11. It is a 3D scene with a camera and some primitives rendered on the screen. As for my code editor, I had experience with Vim before, but I just needed some help setting up NeoVim. I found an article that helped me set up some plugins for NeoVim. I quite like the setup with an explorer on the side and having multiple panels of code docked in one window, and I was glad I was able to replicate it in NeoVim. Now that I've learned everything and my code editor is set up, I'm ready for development. Before I start coding, I try to think about the design and code path I want to take. But as I'm thinking about creating the snake game, I'm hit with an issue. My only tools at my disposal is knowing how to render primitives in this 3D environment. To render these things, I have to use these OpenGL function calls, which in very high level terms, it just changes the state and sends data to the GPU. It would be a mess to try to develop the game and also worry about these OpenGL function calls. What would be nice is if I have a simple interface where I can render something in my environment without interacting with OpenGL. For example, I can create a cube at a specific coordinate by simply instantiating a cube object with a position. Notice here I'm not messing around with any of the OpenGL functions at all, which is the whole point. So my solution is to create some sort of abstraction layer where I don't mess around with these functions when developing this game. Now, I realize what I'm about to do is I'm creating this proto-rendering or game engine, albeit a very simple and probably poorly optimized one. So with that plan, I started work on this abstraction/engine. This is a list of features of what I want the engine to do. I want the engine to handle these things so I do not worry about it when building a game. Note here, this engine just renders cubes, which is fine for the purpose of the snake game. Now, writing this engine took a few weeks, but in the end, this is what using the engine looks like. A very simple interface without any OpenGL functions. And here's the resulting render. It's not much, but it does highlight I can do this much with that minimal amount of code because it is all abstracted away. With the engine now complete, it is time to start developing this game. The logic from the Golang implementation hasn't changed, except this time I'm using a custom built engine, and it is in C++ instead of Golang. Now this took about a week, but here's the end result. Alright, this is the game, and we can see that the snake body just perpetually moving, and I can change directions with my arrow keys. And once I am able to hit this food, you can see the snake body growing. And of course, let's see what happens when we collide into the wall. It loses. We lose when we collide into the wall, and right now I have it programmed so that it just closes out of the game. But I'm not done yet because I'm still not satisfied with the results. You can see that the game is somewhat in 3D, but it's not super apparent because the cubes are using solid colors. What about the textures I promised? And is it really a game if I just start it up and it goes directly into action without some sort of main menu? Or immediately closes the program upon losing the game? So there's more work to be done because I still want textures and different scenes like a main menu screen. To accomplish this, I realized I need to add on a couple of features to the engine. The first is a texture manager to apply textures on primitives. The second is a scene manager to manage different scenes like the snake game and a main menu. And finally, I need a way to render words in OpenGL. I need a scene manager because there will be some custom logic on the render loop depending on the scene. For example, and please excuse my drawings, a main menu is probably static in rendering and accepts input for selection, while in the snake game loop, I need to render the snake game moving and accepts input for changing direction. I also need text in the game, but I don't know how to render them in OpenGL yet. My idea is to create cubes and stack them on top of each other or next to each other so it forms letters. Once I have all 26 letters of the alphabet, I can create words from it. I have here a bitmap that forms the letters. Imagine the ones fill out a cube and the 0 is empty space. This is a bitmap for the letter A and the resulting render. It took me a couple of weeks to refactor this engine, move the snake game logic to its own scene, and create a new main menu scene. And without further ado, here is the final result. The new thing I've added is this main menu where now you can select options. Once I start the game, the solid colors are no more. Instead, we have these textures, thanks to the texture manager. I added a slight twist to the snake game where it rotates the board after a certain amount of time, and there we go. And finally, we have a lose menu screen. Anyhow, that is all, but this is the final product. Overall, I quite enjoyed this project and managed to hit the goals I set out for myself. One thing I definitely learned is that graphics programming, or at least in the OpenGL context, is a beast in itself. There's a lot of things you need to do and just to set up, just to render a single triangle. Maybe I'll continue the other chapters in the OpenGL book. Who knows, only I can tell. Anyhow, I hope you enjoyed my rant on this small project I embarked on. I'm not really sure what I will do next, but I'll definitely post about it. Alright everyone, take care, and I will see you all later. Bye!